The next lesson is 2 steps from roseola. Instead of HHV6, we've progressed to HHV8, and it's equally floral, as you'll soon see. It's best known for causing Kaposi's sarcoma, one of the many AIDS-defining illnesses. So let's set our scene. Our story takes place in a verdant greenhouse owned by Miss Kate, who loves her posies. She's named her shop Kate's Posies, which sounds quite a lot like Kaposi's, no? On the door of her greenhouse will be her emblem, a figure of Hermes, in flight with a bouquet of posies, and the number 8 surrounding him. Kind of a cool emblematic design. This should tie in that Kaposi's sarcoma is caused by HHV8, a herpes virus. As a member of the herpes virus family, you should know that it's a double-stranded DNA virus. And this setting uses predominantly blue and cool colors to remind your mind's eye that it's a DNA virus. At the center of our image will be an elderly woman, bent over a cane. And this is our recurring symbol for immunosuppression. She's also wearing a red AIDS ribbon, which, in this instance, will help us remember the association between AIDS, immunosuppression, and Kaposi's sarcoma. Kaposi's is characterized by erythematous, violaceous lesions on the nose, extremities, and mucous membranes, and may be present as a plaque, patch, macule, or even as a nodule. These lesions arise from primitive vasculature-forming mesenchymal cells. Their pathogenesis involves angiogenesis, and these newly created blood vessels within the lesions cause the violaceous color. So we'll have our little old lady holding a bunch of violet flowers, and we'll have petals on her nose and extremities to remind us where we can expect to see Kaposi's violaceous lesions. So I mentioned that the high vascularity within the lesion causes its violet color. And to remind you of this angiogenesis, we'll have a store worker unrolling irrigation hose to water the flower beds. The hose will be red and is meant to look fairly arterial to remind you that Kaposi's sarcoma causes proliferation of vasculature. The exact way the virus does this is by causing the dysregulation of vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF. And this results in aberrant angiogenesis. So let's add a generous bag of veg fertilizer to remind us that Kaposi's causes dysregulation of VEGF. On the bag is a red branching plant that should also remind us of this angiogenesis. So we've shown you the cutaneous lesions caused by Kaposi's, but remember I said the lesions are not always external, but can occur on mucosal surfaces as well. That means really anywhere in the GI tract. So to remind you of these lesions that can be intraintestinal, we'll have this protective plastic covering on the plantar bed in the back. And it's meant to look quite intestinal with its lumen and Hofstra-esque support structure. So perhaps you may even be shown a picture of Kaposi's sarcoma taken during a colonoscopy. Actually, the most common location for these plaques is the hard palate. So let's include this in our illustration as well. The hard palate is an arched ceiling of our mouth. And look, the greenhouse has an arched ceiling to represent the hard palate. We're drawing violet posies all over the greenhouse's hard palate-like ceiling to represent the many Kaposi's lesions that can occur there. Aside from causing Kaposi's sarcoma, HHV8 can also infect B cells and cause a B-cell lymphoma known as primary effusion lymphoma. However, that's just kind of a random factoid we'll throw in for you. Poor Kate, her store gets a B rating just because of this. And we'll also add a statue of a medieval archer, which is our recurring symbol for B cells. B cells release antibodies that attack distant enemies, just like archers release arrows that attack distant enemies. Transmission of HHV8 is by sexual contact, which includes kissing, especially in men who have sex with men. And there are 3 populations of people whom your index of suspicion for Kaposi's sarcoma should be especially high. We already talked about the AIDS and immunocompromised population, but there are 2 others, which include elderly Russian men, who typically have lower extremity lesions, and people in areas of Africa where the virus is endemic. These adults in Africa will have the classic presentation with palatal lesions, but in children, it can even be fatal. To represent that old Russian men get it and it's endemic in Africa, we've made certain plants to be from these geographical regions. We've added signs for Russian rhododendrons and African azaleas. Lastly, the differential diagnosis for Kaposi's sarcoma is pretty important because the Kaposi's lesions can look really similar to several other common pathological entities. The one that's most commonly confused with is bacillary angiomatosis caused by Bartonella henslei. Remember seeing this leopard that we're adding up against the greenhouse glass? Here's the Bartonella henslei picture. It can be transmitted by cat scratches. Hence, we have Bart the leopard in the center of the sketch. We've added Bart the leopard here in the Kaposi drawing to help you remember to consider it on the differential. To definitively differentiate these two, the lesion must be examined microscopically. Kaposi's sarcoma is accompanied by a lymphocytic infiltrate versus bacillary angiomatosis, which has a neutrophilic infiltrate. And this makes sense since Kaposi has a viral etiology and bacillary angiomatosis has a bacterial etiology. In general, the only treatment that you need to know would be to start antiretroviral therapy if the patient is HIV positive and hasn't started it yet. These lesions should start to shrink as the patient responds to therapy. And that just about wraps up HHV8 and Kaposi's sarcoma. The important features to really remember are that it can be confused with Bartonella henslei. It causes angiogenesis via dysregulation of VEGF, and if you're really good, remember that it infects B cells and can cause a type of B-cell lymphoma known as primary effusion lymphoma. Your friends will be really jealous of your massive intellect.